Team, welcome back to week 2, part 2 of our conversation with Rachele Pojednic. We won't labor you with another bio. If you want to know about her full background, all of her accolades, go back and listen to the start of part 1. But this is the second of 3 conversations that we will have with Rachele. What do you think?
I think this is the part where we actually talked to her about the things we had planned when we scheduled one episode with her originally. The whole idea was to talk about bridging the gap between research and industry and figuring out which of the various like quote unquote evidence-based things that industry is selling people for performance and recovery actually have evidence. That's the kind of stuff we finally dig into here.
So enjoy. Hey, why are you fired up to talk to us tonight, Rachele?
Okay, so I was just, as I do before I come onto your podcast, I exercise, right? So I was going for my run and I was listening.
I was running right before this too. Good.
I was making ice cream.
Making ice cream?
Yeah, making ice cream.
Drew's a from scratch kind of guy.
I aspire to be Laura Ingalls Wilder. That's sort of my life goal.
Somebody sent me, I'm on a bit of a cottage cheese kick lately. Took me a while to come around. Not a fan for a long time, but it's growing on me. But somebody sent me a recipe for cottage cheese ice cream. And I was like, I think we're taking this a step too far.
There is a guy, we're going down a rabbit hole, but there's a guy on Instagram. I forget his name. Otherwise I'd give him a shout out, but he takes different types of wood and like boils them down to their essence and captures the like fragrance and turns it into ice cream. And I think that it's like Willet ice cream or something. And he makes
like mahogany ice cream,
like cedar.
What?
Yeah, it's unreal. I think if people type in wood ice cream, you'll go. It's incredible, and it looks good too.
Drew's been in like rural North Carolina for way too long.
Yeah, we're out here making wood ice cream.
I was in Vermont for years, man. That would fly there.
That'd probably be even worse. But anyway, why are you fired up today?
Well, so I was listening.
Speaking of ice cream
podcast, I was getting, like mentally set for it. And I listened to your gym myths and facts. Drew, I did not know you had such animosity for researchers.
I do. No, here, let me clarify. I have animosity for bad researchers.
Yeah,
that's why I'm happy that you're on here, because I know one of the things we want to talk about is the gap between research and I guess practical. I was going to say practicality. It doesn't make sense.
Real life.
No, I think for all the researchers out there, I think you're great people. I think the issue is that as a coach, I can count on 2 fingers the times that I've opened up a research journal to, interact with an athlete. So I hope you can speak to that so that I can become friends with researchers again.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. I mean, I think, Alex, that's
were you mad?
Was I mad? No.
Were you listening? Like, this fucking guy?
No, not at all.
Because the contracting episode we had, I think he was mad at me about contract.
No,
okay.
I was very affirming. I was like, this is actually like why I'm doing what I'm doing with my life.
Hell
now.
yeah.
So it was actually like really, as I'm listening to you, I'm like, Drew's right. Like he's totally right. Yeah. Yeah.
Drew gets enough positive affirmation. He doesn't need to be told he's right.
No, somebody DM'd you and said I was an ass.
That happens all the time. I'm used to it.
Well, that's fair. Okay, but hey, I'm right. Let's unpack this rightness.
You're right. I even wrote down a little quote. Are you ready? This is your quote that you were so right about. You said, "What do you gain from writing a manuscript that only 5 people are going to read that lives behind a paywall?"
Right? Can you explain to me, maybe this is an aside, why are research journals so expensive?
Can I put the other end of the spectrum on there? An article that thousands of people are going to read that is once again squats versus hip thrusts. Like, why? Anyway.
Wait, are you team squat or are you team hip thrust?
I'm team, we should stop researching it because it doesn't matter.
That's fair. I could get behind that. Why are research journals so expensive?
It's big business. That's it. It's a business like any others. It is not altruism on any level.
Then how are you supposed to sustain?
This is an excellent question.
Thank you. How are you supposed to sustain this?
Actually, before we go too far in this question, I want to zoom out for a second because this is something that's like kind of politically hot at the moment. And to explain to people, I'm going to like get dangerously political for a second, but like on a specific issue. And I'm going to say, if you don't trust industry-funded research and you also cut government-funded research, that just means you don't want research.
Bingo.
You need one or the other, right? And a lot of times when something is quote unquote industry funded, it's because laws are in place that requires certain industries to put money into research as a result of like other laws that protect their profits. So it's not because like they're trying to get that research done. It's because they pay fees that fund some, like it sounds really simple to say like don't trust research if it's funded by the industry that benefits from it, but like that space is a little more complicated. There's only so many ways to fund research, so you have to make a compromise at some point.
And enter Dr. Rachele Pojednic here, who has recently, and by recently in the last 3 years or so, really been really driving hard in this space of how do we bring these two worlds together. And this is before the political climate that we have found ourselves in, where we're seeing dramatic cuts to the NIH. Something like 40% right now is being proposed. People don't understand the funding mechanism, and we can talk a little bit about what that money actually goes toward. But to your point, Alex, the alternative is industry has to step in. And if industry doesn't step in, then science goes away, which is really problematic. And when industry does step in, it is automatically seen as bias for all the correct reasons that people should be skeptical of funding and funding sources. But I think what I'm trying to do right now is A, bridge these two worlds, and B, pull the curtain back a little bit on both so that people really understand what is good science, where can it be done, where is the money going, how is it being used. And yeah, I think that's kind of what we wanted to talk about in the first episode, and we got a little bit excited about nutrition research and how that's actually done.
There's no telling where this is going.
Well, to like try and keep it slightly on track, I think we established in the previous episode what your role on the academia side is. Can you take a second and explain what your role in the industry side is? And I think you'll naturally do this, but explain along the way how you protect the integrity of the research you're doing while bridging that gap.
Right. So in the first episode, you remember I'm a faculty member. I have an appointment at Stanford. I had previously been on the tenure track on the East Coast. So I was at Norwich University, which I think is kind of how you and I got originally connected. And prior to that, I was in Boston. So I still live about 25% of my time in the academic world at Stanford, teaching and doing research and collaborations on that campus. But about 75% of my time, I'm the chief science officer at a company called Restore. It is, I think you could call it an integrative wellness company. So something like, or interventional wellness. They do red light therapy, cryotherapy, intravenous micronutrients, which we'll talk about hopefully. I think that was the study that I said I wanted to do at the last episode. But all of these things that Drew, you said in the gym myths episode, you were like, why don't people study the cool shit that people actually want to hear about, right? And I think there has to be an understanding of who does what research well and why some people are positioned to do research in some places versus others. So when I pivoted to industry, one of the major reasons that I did is because I was really frustrated with the way that my academic research career was going. I think you mentioned in that episode, it's super slow. It takes forever. It takes a ton of funding. That funding is incredibly competitive. Not something that's being talked about a lot as we are cutting all of the budgets for research is this money isn't just handed out willy-nilly. There are probably about 200 applicants for every grant that there is available. So I wanted to study the stuff that people were really excited about. I, for the longest time, did vitamin D research. And then I was looking at CBD because you could buy it at every gas station and you couldn't find a single study about it, despite the fact that everybody was making all these claims. I eventually started to look at some temperature therapies for muscle. And it was when I was in Vermont. And I proposed, in collaboration with Restore, before I went and started really working for them, I proposed a study looking at cryotherapy for skeletal muscle recovery and regeneration. It was when the data on cold plunge started to first come out that said, this is probably not good for muscle. And I was like, cool, let's look at it in a slightly different way to see if it works, reduces inflammation, whatever. And I put it through my IRB. So if you know what an IRB, it's an ethics board that basically says, yes, you're doing human subjects research appropriately. You're protecting all of the participants in your study in an appropriate way. We give you the green light to do the study. So I'm in Northern Vermont, right? And I'm like, I want to do this study on cryotherapy, and I want to take a bunch of athletes, the cadets, and I want to put them in a cold chamber to see if it's helpful for them after their, morning PT or whatever. And when I got the IRB back, the ethics review back, they were like, you need a physical for every single one of your participants. You need a study physician that is there and on site every time you put somebody into a cryo chamber. There's all these like red tape that you need to jump through. And I was like, I literally opened the door of my office and I'm looking out into the Dog River. And there are like the entire wrestling team in the middle of December in Northern Vermont, like cold plunging into, and I'm just like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, they're doing this already. I just want to understand it. The people are making all of these claims on the internet about whether it's good or whether it's bad. I just want to put some data behind this, right? And so that was kind of step one for me. And it just kind of kept spiraling where I was just like, I'm frustrated. I can't get the money to study what I want to study. I wanted to really pivot to women's health at the time as well, because we have, understanding that women and men physiology potentially could be different. I got a review back from one of my grants that was like, why do you want to study women? Why don't you want to study men? Why don't you want to compare women to men? And I'm like, you know what I want to study? Yeah, I want to study. And this is like before all the DEI conversation. Like this is like, before our current political. And I was just like, you know what? I just want to study the stuff that I want to study, and I want to study it well. And I want it to make a difference to the real person that is trying to weed through all of this information. Because Drew, as you pointed out, that data is in a paper that is probably not decipherable to somebody that wasn't trained to investigate science and really tease out what that science is saying. And it's also, as you pointed out, 9 times out of 10, you go through PubMed and you click on the show me the full link, and it's, $69, $87 to get the article. So I was asked by Restore to come and spin up their Restore Labs division because, to their credit, and Alex, I think this is the point that you were making just a moment ago, they recognize that they're operating in an environment where they actually need to do some science in order to make marketing claims, in order to provide good information to their clients, to show them, who are fairly sophisticated and educated consumers, what is this stuff actually doing? Why should you keep coming back? And to their credit, they were like, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. We're going to fund you. We're going to fund a research assistant. We are going to give you a budget to do these studies. Will you come and do it? And I sat with the CEOs and I said, yes, on one condition. I am not rubber stamping your shit. Like, I'm not coming in and only doing studies that come out with the results that you're looking for, which is something that we do in academia all the time, is that we disclose where we get our fundings from. We have a relationship with our general counsel at the university that says whatever data we collect, we have permission to publish it, even if it doesn't align with our funders, ethos or what they're hoping to get out of the study. And so I basically put the same bumpers into place when I took my job. And it's literally in my contract that I have autonomy over my own data, and then I am allowed to publish. And like it or not, they have to bend their business model to what our data actually says. So that's what I'm working on now, is how can we take the incredible training and the good science that I was doing in academia and apply it to an industry that's fun, that's interesting. Like, I'm not curing cancer, although we can talk about some really interesting clinical populations that we are looking at. But this is just an area, human performance, longevity, healthy aging, fill in the buzzword, has always been my bread and butter. And I wanted to take it to the place that real people were going and utilizing these therapies and apply some good science to it.
So at the risk of getting off track again, and we're going to make this like very narrowly defined, then we're going to come back to the topic we're on. You like briefly mentioned and then cruised right past a research interest in CBD. Where's that research at these days? And if, like, hypothetically a podcast wanted to do an episode on like whether CBD should be available to service members, who would they go talk to?
It's so interesting that you say this. So when I got the job at Norwich, I was pitching them that I was doing research on CBD, and they were like, nobody on campus can use that, right? And I was like, yet, right? And part of it is we just don't have any good data, but I can guarantee that like, you know, they're going down to the gas station and there's options that they can buy and all these like sodas and everything that have been infused or massage oil that people are using for CBD. And so I have to say, I have published probably 2 or 3 papers on CBD. Now, I actually just submitted one again this afternoon. This was in Young Active Women. I have to say, I am very underwhelmed with the CBD research, like I've probably the past 3 or 4 years had a poster that I've presented at any given conference next to, you know, 5 or 6 other people that are also doing CBD research. And the null data is kind of becoming too loud to ignore. And by null data, for folks that don't understand the way that we sort of interpret data, it's like nothing happened, right? And
especially
so,
since they promised like it did everything,
and
right?
that's the problem, is that the hype was so real. You know, frankly, this is really where my interest started to be piqued, in this disconnect between what people can say in industry and what the data actually shows. I'll offer a glimmer of hope for CBD. It might work at very, very, very high doses. And by very high doses, what we're seeing a little bit of signal is about 500 milligrams of application. So if you think about the tincture bottle that you might go get at the store, it usually has somewhere between 500 and 1,000 milligrams in the bottle. Just a reminder for anybody that's ever bought CBD before, that 500 to 1,000 milligram bottle is typically somewhere between $60 and $100. So maybe it might work at that super high doses. The cost barrier is so huge that I'm not really sure, unless we can get the cost down, that it's even worth really looking into. There's some pharmaceutical grade products that also have a little bit of THC in them that might be interesting. I don't imagine THC being on the green light list anytime soon for a military population, although I'm not going to read the tea leaves there.
The weed leaves.
The weed leaves, good one. The other thing that I'll say about CBD is it's really, really, really hard to study. When we were talking about this last time, it's in this very funny gray zone where CBD, typically derived from a marijuana plant, not so much from hemp, is regulated by the states, not by the federal government. So when I was studying CBD, I had a federal grant. I had an NIH grant to study it. And the NIH was basically like, you can't study this because we don't view this as what they call GRAS supplement. GRAS means generally recognized as safe. And so they were like, you can't give it to anybody. You can ask them if they use it, and you can come up with clever ways to figure out if they're ingesting it, but you can't actually bring them to your lab and give it. That has changed. There are groups that are now able to do it, and there are IRBs that are allowing it. But my IRB in 2 institutions was like, hell no, absolutely not. We're not letting you give it. So I will even cop to the idea that like my studies were kind of the study design I'm not super proud of. They were a little bit rinky dink, but as the study designs are getting better and people are giving it, I just don't see where it's helpful. One last thing, and then we can come off the rabbit hole of CBD. What we tend to see when we do real world studies of CBD users is that those that use CBD tend to be the worst sleepers, the most in pain, people seeking any kind of natural option to help them so that they don't have to turn to more pharmaceutical type substances, right? And so what I don't know in the real world data that I think about now is, if we gave those folks that were the worst sleepers, the most in pain CBD, you can't see my hands if you're listening to this, but they start out where like, if you've got one group that's like really, really, really bad off and one group that's just kind of fine, the fine group, if you give them CBD, will probably, the effect size, the amount that they will see and affect is probably pretty minimal. That group of people tends to be the group of people that are included in these randomized controlled trials that we are giving people CBD from. What we're not finding yet, hopefully in the future, are those people that have chronic pain, that have insomnia. And I would argue if you give those people CBD and they move a little bit closer to the normal population, even though they might still look like bad sleepers and that they've got pain, that if you've helped them a little bit, that might be a reason why you would think about using CBD so that they don't turn to some of these alternatives. So there's a mixed message here. And I think, honestly, this is why we need to do better studies in the populations that A, are using it, and B, probably need it most.
What about collagen?
Not a fan.
Data on it is
dire.
Because you're right. I mean, you made a point there, which was to say that, like, especially on social media, you do see a gravitation towards, I mean, I'll use collagen as an example because I see it all the time, but like, do the little tincture, do the thing, it solves all your problems. And I guess my question there would be, like, as a scientist who does research these things and who does know the efficacy of these things, what do you say to like a CBD user or a collagen user? Because inevitably there are some out there who are going to be like, well, it works for me. Is that just a placebo? And it's like, okay, great, carry on. Or like, how do you handle that? Team, this episode of MOPs MOEs is brought to you by TrainHeroic. TrainHeroic is a reliable, well-designed platform for programming, tracking, and communicating with athletes. If you've been with us for any length of time, you will know that TrainHeroic is the platform that we use to power our own training, long and strong, which you can find at our website, mopsandmoes.com. If you're looking for a solid platform to support your own coaching, whether it's your full-time role or a side hustle, TrainHeroic is definitely worth checking out. You can use the link in any of our show notes, you can find it in our newsletter, or you can head to our website, mopsandmoes.com/training to get your first week for free.
Quality placebos are awesome, by the way.
I loved, you guys kind of went down a tiny rabbit hole on that last podcast about placebos as well. Placebos are real. Like, that is a real effect. There's an entire institute at Harvard that studies, and many places, but there's a really good one at Harvard that studies placebo effects specifically.
I imagine it looks like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Just fake stuff that works but doesn't.
I mean, it is powerful, as is the nocebo, right? So telling somebody that something is going to be harmful or it's not going to have an effect. That has a pretty dramatic effect on people. And so that's why we need to do good study designs. This has nothing to do with placebo effect, but you were all highlighting a study, and rightfully so. You were picking apart the questions and the way that the questions were written on that study. This is so dumb. Why would you ask a question like this? Like, there actually is nuance behind this question that you could pause and say, yes, animal protein and vegan protein is different. And like, you could make an argument for like why whey and lysine could be a beneficial, but the answer to the question was like, there's no difference, right? And so this is why really well-trained scientists need to be doing these studies and need to be creating the study designs so that you don't end up with a study that is, I'm not going to say that study was dumb, but I don't know how you interpret the results of that study.
It was dumb. Right? We can say it was dumb.
No fault. I hesitate because I had not heard of the study, nor had I read it before like a half an hour ago. But my suspicion is that a really well-intentioned graduate student or undergraduate student probably put that together with a really good idea of what do people actually know when they go to the gym, and can they discern from myths and not myths. But if you were a really good survey designer, you would have looked at those questions and said, you're going to get answers based upon the way that you're asking this in the way that you are not intending. And so this is why it's so critically important when we look at industry science to not have people that don't know what they're doing. I'm using heavy air quotes here, conducting science in industry, especially in the wellness space, because they don't know what they're doing. They're really good at business. They're really, really good at marketing. And we have a ton to learn from them as researchers on how to actually share the information from our science. But we need to work together to get good science done in this emerging space.
So I hope this question ends up making sense at some point. But I know we've sort of spoken to this over a couple of episodes now, but it's this idea that you have on the one hand, we'll call them practitioners, coaches, whatever, doing things, having success, anecdotally
sharing information. This is how my athlete won a gold medal, yada, yada, yada. We have the famous example of the Norwegian 10K speed skater, and he published his whole training log. Like, that's the stuff that the, I guess, industry gravitates towards. But then on the other hand, you have kind of the researchers who are publishing very high level research, finding out really interesting things. And there's this massive gap between those two. So I guess my question is, where is sort of the burden of proof here? Like, who is beholden? Do the coaches do we need to pay more credence towards the anecdotal information and elevate that to the kind of cultural significance that science holds? Or do we need to, I hate this phrase, but like dumb down the science so that the layperson can approach a research journal and actually understand what's going on? Like, which direction does it need to go in to meet in the middle?
I would say the information needs to be coming from both directions. So on the one hand, and we talked about this in the last episode, scientists suck at Instagram. They suck at sharing and communicating their science in a way that is usable. It was interesting. Again, I keep referencing this and it's just fresh in mind for me because I was just listening to it. But there was I think it was, you guys were quoting the NSCA journal.
Oh man.
And there were a couple
pastime.
There was an article that was something like a phenotype that's either going to respond or not respond to collagen supplementation, right? And Drew, you were like, wah, wah, boring, right? But if that scientist was a really good science communicator, they would be able to tell their coach community, this is the person that you want to recommend collagen to, and this is the person that you don't want to recommend collagen to because they're just not going to respond, right? So it's actually quite practical to be able to share that information in a way that the coach is going to be able to use. From the other direction, I went to an absolutely amazing talk probably 4 or 5 years ago at the American College of Sports Medicine conference that was done by this panel of just amazing scientists that do incredible work. And one of them is a woman named Louise Burke. She is at the Australian Institute of Science for the longest time. And her job essentially is to make Australian Olympians, to give them the knowledge for nutrition that's going to get them on the podium. Right. So she is an incredible nutrition scientist with an eye and a lens for human performance, specifically in elite level athletics. And
do you know her?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we'll hang out with her. That's fine.
She'd be incredible. You would love to talk to her. She's
sick.
absolutely amazing. She's
cool.
She's like the GOAT. I'm not kidding.
Yeah. No, I mean, we'll for sure have her on.
Yeah,
Thank you.
For all the people who asked me over the last month, I'm sorry I was not at ACSM. I would say Drew's sorry, but he doesn't go to conferences anymore, and he's not sorry.
Well, you missed my amazing presentation on how critical it is that industry and academia work together.
Here we have
the MOPs MOEs podcast guest meetup that happened at ACSM.
Wow, sorry.
All right. Well, let me get back to the coaches.
Keep going.
So, Louise Burke gives this presentation, and she says, you know what we need to do, scientists? We need to start listening to the coaches, because you know what they're doing? They're like dicking around on the field and on the track, and they're trying things and they're seeing what works, and they're not studying it because they don't know how, but what they're seeing is results. They're using intuition, they're using years of experience, and they are tweaking things based on people's body types, based on the results that people are getting on the track during a training or whatever. And she gave this really good example of marathoners using red can Coke at a certain period during the marathon. And if you were to look at the data, you'd be like, it doesn't really make sense that red can Coke at that specific time period, and forgive me, I can't remember exactly when it was, at a time that you wouldn't expect it to be able to work very well. And she's like, it doesn't really make any sense. But for some reason, all of these elite level marathoners are doing this and it's working out for them. And she's
I know a lot of triathletes who let the carbonation out of Coke.
Yeah.
Hugely popular.
Yeah. And so I use it when I cycle now. After I saw that, I was like, it's like rocket fuel. It's awesome. But the reason that she thought red can Coke was kind of not that novel, it was like the specific time period where people were taking it in. And it had to do with like the kinetics of carbohydrate metabolism, and how she was like, I don't know why it would be working.
When you say red can Coke versus clear bottle Coke?
Yeah, like full sugar.
Yeah. Full sugar.
I don't really drink. Okay, this makes sense.
Gray can.
Silver can, Diet Coke. Okay.
Exactly. Silver can, Diet Coke.
Got it.
The black one that's like Coke Zero, whatever.
Zero. Okay,
Yeah.
Yep.
Red can Coke.
Red can Coke.
Sugar Coke. Sugar Coke. Full sugar Coke.
Sugar Coke. Cocaine.
I mean, anyways, the whole point of the presentation was you need to listen to the coaches and the athletes and go and investigate where they are doing things. We talked last time about the study that Luke Van Leeuwen's group did with 100 grams of protein, right? And we talked a little bit about why was the recommendation only, 20 to 40 grams pulse throughout the day? That was where the science was. It's also kind of the way that people consume protein, so it seemed logical. And then when you look at it, it's like, actually, it's just because that's the way we studied it for so long. We were just designing the studies to replicate that model. Nobody was like, hey, let's give somebody 100 grams of protein at one time and see if it works, even though all the dietitians that are out in the world are like, we give our athletes 60, 80, 100 grams of protein often, especially if they're traveling or they've got a time crunch or like whatever's going on. And so I think, Drew, to your point, is like it actually needs to be bi-directional. Like we need to figure out how to share the science when we have it so that it is not behind a paywall on a white paper that's going to take people hours to get through, especially if they're not trained to really understand it. And then we also need to be looking in the field, in the real world, and start to pay attention to what's going on there, which is something that I think about all the time in my day-to-day. My restore therapies, IV micronutrients. If you were to ask a dietitian, should you be giving people IV micronutrients? They're like, absolutely not. This is dangerous. Like, this is not the way that we should be giving nutrients. Maybe they're right, but there's no data on it. And meanwhile, this is a multi-billion-dollar business now where everybody's going to these studios, shooting themselves up with vitamin C and glutathione, and nobody knows what it's doing. Or like red light therapy, right? Like everybody's talking about red light now and how it affects your mitochondria and enhances recovery. There's a couple of small animal studies that show this. There's a cool lab that we're collaborating with at Harvard that's doing this kind of work, but the data is minimal, right? But people are flocking to it and paying for it like crazy because they think it's going to help. And so this is where I'm living right now is I'm like, I'm in the real world. I'm seeing what people are doing. I'm trying to understand why. And then I'm trying to understand what it's actually doing, which is kind of fun.
Do you think that the red light therapies of the world, the freebasing micronutrients, all these sorts of things, is that because people would rather spend money to think that they're doing something versus actually do something? Mm-hmm. Because let's call this the Fitbit phenomenon, right? Like people, I see this all the time with people I work with. They would rather spend the money to do the wearable and get the devices than actually go out and go for a walk. Because they like to, like I tell Alex, people like to feel informed, not actually be informed. And I think the same thing goes with fitness. They like to feel like they're fitnessing, but they don't actually want to fitness.
I was recently asked by a service member who did not have room at their apartment for a cold plunge, whether they could like buy the cold plunge and store it in like the human performance team's space to come use it. And like, we're not at a level where like services like that make any sense, to be honest. It's, yeah, just underlining the point of people would rather spend money on things than do things.
Yeah. So I think that this is a multi-pronged answer here. So the first thing is I have this dream that, and I have no time or bandwidth.
Speech that started out like that.
No, I am not of that caliber at all. I have a dream about cold plunge. No, I have this dream. Somebody should take this idea and run with it because I don't have time or bandwidth. Happy to collaborate. Where in these apps that we have, whether it's a wearables app or it's, whatever it is that we're looking at, or maybe it's a brand new app all by itself, we show something called effect size, right? We've talked about this before. And the effect size is basically a graph. I'm a very visual person of these are the things that you're doing to make yourself healthy in the day-to-day. And this is the actual impact that it is having on the outcome that you are looking for. And if you were to look at that, the bars that would be off the charts literally are exercise. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's resistance training or zone 2, just as long as you're moving your body, right? Like that bar is going to be huge. Eating a nutritious diet with enough protein and enough fiber, also off the charts. Getting enough sleep, off the charts, right? And I'm throwing my own work and my own science under the bus now. But if you were to look at cold plunge or cryotherapy, like the bar is going to be this big, very, very, very tiny on the effect size of these outcomes that you're looking for. So getting those foundational basics down is the most important part. However, that doesn't get socialized to people, right? So I'll give you a really good example. I teach an all-comers course at Harvard Extension School every spring. When you sign up for a course at Harvard Extension, it could be you're 18 years old, you're just curious about, whatever, you're 81 years old, you're a lifelong learner, you just want to pop in and listen. So I teach this course on physical activity. If you were to ask the students in my course, and every year it's a pretty well attended course, there's like 75, 100 students that are in the course. If you were to ask them at the beginning of the course, have you ever heard of the physical activity guidelines?
No.
Not a single student would raise their hand. And not only that, have they not heard of the physical activity guidelines, they would have absolutely no idea that the general recommendations are 150 minutes of moderate exercise per week. Please get 2 days of resistance training, right? And that is when I show them the data of the impact of 150 minutes of whatever the hell you want to do, and I show them the curves and I show them the graphs and how important physical fitness is, they sit there like their eyes are bugging out of their heads because they're like, wait, what about zone 2? What about sprint interval training? What about like high intensity? Like, should I be jumping? Should I not be jumping? And I'm like, we are losing the messaging game because people don't realize how high that bar on that chart of effect size would be if you just did anything to move your body. Right?
My go-to like crowd engagement assessment is the sitting rising test.
Yeah.
And this morning I had a guy, pretty sure he was under 20 years old, score a 6 on the sitting rising test.
Wait, what's the sitting rising test?
Out of 10, if you score like 7 or below, significant increased risk of early mortality. It's like, how much help do you need to get on and off the floor?
Oh, the one where if you don't have to use your hands, you're going to live forever. Yeah.
And so
we have people asking about really in the weeds stuff. Well, they're like not functional yet.
And that being said, okay, so that's parts 1 and 2, right? So part 1, we have these foundational behaviors that we know blow any of these complementary therapies out of the water, like no questions asked. And part 2 is we are so bad at socializing that people don't even know how important that actually is, right? Part 3 is then we've actually got these therapies that I think could potentially be helpful for people. So I'll give you a couple of examples. And this is using these therapies in ways that are not necessarily enhancing performance, but that can be really helpful to health. I live in California. You have all heard about it, had a massive wildfire in LA, 6-8 months ago at this point. And I'm working with a researcher at UCSF right now to think about how to use sauna for essentially detoxification of people that are exposed to high levels of environmental toxicants. So for the lay listener out there, you have probably heard often that sauna detoxes you, right? And everybody believes it. I am here to tell you that study has never been done.
Don't
never
say
been done.
that.
Yeah.
But the Finnish love it.
I know.
The shauna.
I know. What we can show right now in the data is that when you sweat, heavy metals come out, proteins come out, the other toxicants come out. We can measure it in your sweat. What we don't know, this study has never been done, is does it actually reduce biological burden? So do you actually sweat out enough that you are getting a quote unquote detoxifying effect in your blood, in your tissues? So this one researcher that I'm working with is taking a bunch of firefighters and bringing them into her lab in a very, very, very controlled study. She's making them sweat like crazy in a sauna that is a clinical grade sauna. She's collecting urine, sweat, hair, saliva, blood to see if you sweat out these toxins in some place in your body, does it actually reduce that burden? And so what we wanted to do at Restore, we've got 7 or 8 studios in the LA area, is we basically wanted to replicate that study in the real world. So when you look at these highly controlled studies, super cool, super important to understand mechanism, to understand effect size. But if you're working with a bunch of firefighters that are out in the field for 3, 4, 7, 10 days at a time, they come in, they get in your sauna. There's perhaps a sauna in the firehouse. We know that they are exposed at every level, whether it's out in the field, whether it's through their protective gear, whether it's because the truck is running in the firehouse, right? This group is just constantly being exposed. What we wanted to know is if we bring them into the sauna in real life, they come when they can, we collect all their stuff, does it actually work? Sadly, we did not get funding for that study, which was a real bummer. But I do live in California and Alex lives in Colorado, so maybe we'll be able to find some wildland firefighters or something to study in the future. But that's
I'll offer a different one that might be easier.
Okay.
So you're talking about toxins introduced into the environment.
Yeah.
And that's fantastic. And we love our firefighters and stuff. But I can offer you,
The military.
we're talking about sweating out toxins. Any given military installation, preferably one with large infantry presence on it. I think a lot of people would love to know if it accelerates alcohol clearance from the system. And I can find you infinity volunteers that are like meeting the criteria necessary for the study. They're ready to go. And almost every Army gym has a sauna in it. So like things are already set up for that study.
We could definitely do this study for sure. I don't know if does Big Army or Big Navy actually want to know the answer to that?
If you get the right commander, probably. Big Army probably would.
Yeah, maybe.
All right. Well, if we can get permission from the higher ups, that's been an interesting barrier when I've done studies in the warfighter groups. Is there's always been pushback on like, do we actually want to know the answer to this question?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions that the military does not want to know the answer to and prefers a little gray area.
Yeah. So other ones that we're looking at right now that I think are interesting, and I won't go into as great a detail as the firefighter study, but like we've got a bunch of people that have long COVID now, right? And they have what we call autonomic dysautonomia. So they have heart rate issues, they get migraines, they get headaches. And we're trying right now to figure out like, do these IV micronutrients help, right? When you hydrate and give these large doses, is it helpful? We're looking at sauna as well as cryotherapy as a cold or hot stimulus to essentially re-regulate their autonomic nervous system. We've got another study. This is a group, both the long COVID study as well as the study are done with some collaborators at Harvard. We're looking at people that have depression, and we're looking at putting them in a sauna versus doing hot yoga because we want to understand and tease out the difference between body temperature, which is highly related to depression. I didn't know this before I started this work, which was super cool. People that have depression run hot compared to people that don't. And they also are not able to regulate their response to heat in the same way that people that don't have depression. So what we're trying to do with this study is tease out, is it just the hot? Or is it something like hot plus exercise, or just even exercise alone, which also raises your core temperature, to figure out what the mechanism is there for people that have depression. So there is good utility for a lot of these therapies that we're looking at that are independent of the sort of typical human performance and longevity space.
Is there, oh, there we go. I refocused myself. I'm backing up a little bit, but I think it's still relevant. And I'm curious if there's even an avenue or a forum for coaches and practitioners, providers to propose research concepts to researchers.
There's no good formal way to do it right now or yet, but if they want to propose a study to me, they can email me at restorelabs@restore.com. Yeah, feel free.
Drew, do you want to invite her to join?
Yeah, hop on our Discord. We have a community full of practitioners. We'll give you a free ticket. They'll give you all the research you want.
But so you're asking a really good and important question as we move forward. We've been sort of hinting at, yeah, Drew, you're like full of them today. It's good.
God, man.
We are seeing in all the spaces that we're talking about a massive reduction of funding, right? There's no doubt about it. It is happening. This is the new reality. I have been listening to and speaking with a lot of colleagues and mentors, and it's a bit mixed right now as to whether they think it's going to go back to normal in a few years, or if like we've just like bent the curve so hard that we are never going to go back to the way that it is. I live in that camp. I think that we are living in a new reality, but there is opportunity for foundations, for private entities, for industry to start to collaborate with researchers in a new and open kind of way. Where previously researchers do collaborate with industry. Like if you've ever gotten a product that's like, we have this randomized controlled trial of, the whatever study, it's really funny. You'll sometimes go to these product like landing pages and be like, oh, we did this study, but it never actually links to the study.
Right.
And sometimes it's because the study was garbage, but sometimes it's because the researchers, which are at the university, were like, I don't actually want to put my name on that. So can you just not link to the study? Just like tell people what it is, because it's tough on people's reputations, right? But I think that's changing. And I think, maybe your Discord is kind of like where this conversation starts. A really good example of one, have you seen the Netflix documentary with the twins?
I saw a commercial for the one about the poop cruise. I think that one's different.
Not that one. That's
I haven't
definitely
seen
different.
the twins. I know about the twin study, though. I used to date a twin.
They're alive.
Literally, they were part of the study. That's why I'm saying that. Not just as like a shout out.
In this particular study, this was a study done by Christopher Gardner at Stanford. And they were looking at a vegetarian versus a omnivorous diet on health outcomes. And it became this like really popular Netflix documentary. And there's a lot of holes that you could poke in the study, and there's a lot of holes that you can poke in the documentary. But all of us in the field were like, this is the best science communication that I have seen, like in
Netflix?
real life. It was on, I know. I'm usually a
No,
Netflix
it's good.
documentary basher, believe me. However, this was a study that was done by probably the leading, if not one of the most highly regarded nutrition researchers in the world. And it was funded entirely by private money. And he just wanted to do the study, and he wanted to do it well. And I think that there was a little bit of bias on the side of the funder where they were like excited about plant-based diets, but it kind of didn't come out in their way. And again, contract that's like, we're going to publish it. We're going to run with it the way that we want to run with it. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here for this interprofessional collaboration between different industries. And if we don't do it and don't do it well, again, science goes away, which is not going to serve any of us for the long term.
You need a Bill Nye the Science Guy of exercise science.
Me, I'll do it. Count me in.
He's a brilliant communicator.
I'm going to have to check out that particular documentary because I'm like approach any nutrition documentary with like a massive degree of skepticism.
Alex, you're going to be able to poke a lot of holes in this. And I will also, I'll send it to you.
It's not fun. Don't encourage, like I'll share things with Alex. The first thing I get back is like, here's all the reasons why this is stupid. It's like, okay, well.
Well, because I mean, I listened to a lot of the lifestyle medicine annual conference recently, and like several of those people like brushed off massive conflicts of interest as though it was a joke, like openly laughing about it on stage. I was like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah. So in that space, I think that's also something that we need to get really good at doing is like, no, this is funded by XYZ. They do have an inherent interest in this. This is how we show that the data was done. The data collection, the study design was done well and independently. And we as the scientists or even the funders can't laugh that off because again, what it does immediately is fill this vacuum of like, oh, they don't care. They're so biased. And it leaves the client or the consumer in exactly the same spot they're in right now, which is like complete chaos.
All right. We're at almost 50 minutes here. I might like accelerate the pace a little bit because I want to get through a few of these questions here.
Yeah, rapid fire.
This first one, I don't think we can do fast. This first one is going to have to be a long answer. Then the rest of them, I think, will be quicker. And you've touched on this in the conversation so far. But what fitness and wellness intervention stuff really does have the evidence to back it up? And what fitness and wellness stuff is way overhyped without the evidence?
Well, we talked about supplements last time. I think there's a ton of overhype there. There's utility for some. I also teased the 5 that work.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were supposed to do that right away.
Hey, welcome back to this week's episode. The 5 that work. Go.
5 that work. Creatine, caffeine.
Creatine works. Okay. We're coming back to creatine. Keep going.
Caffeine.
Okay.
Nitrates. Bicarb. Beta-alanine.
Like baking soda?
Baking soda, but don't take baking soda. It'll mess you up. And then potentially this is emerging. It wasn't part of the original 5 is omega-3s.
Did you not include vitamin D after your research?
I know. It's not.
Or whey protein?
For performance enhancement specifically, they were looking at like what the intention of that particular substance was and did it enhance performance, not
so
necessarily
those 5?
recovery.
Say those 5 again. Creatine,
caffeine, nitrate, bicarb, beta-alanine.
Are
so
these
those are the
powders
ones that
we can buy online? I'm asking for the people.
Before we go too deep, Drew is going to have to ask you a question on creatine because there's been some weird creatine stuff going around the internet lately.
Question. Yeah.
Before he does that, nitrates, like Beet Elite is really expensive.
Yeah.
And arugula and beets and spinach are not very expensive.
Yeah.
Is there that much of an advantage to getting it in supplement form versus getting it in whole food form?
That's an excellent question, and nobody's done that study. So
Okay,
I don't know.
thanks.
I don't know if the concentration is enough in fruits and vegetables in order to intact fruits and vegetables. I can tell you the dose is definitely different. So take that as
Yeah.
Have you put that stuff in arugula in a smoothie? It ruins
Yeah.
it.
I also, one of
not
my
a big
favorite
arugula fan.
salads is like arugula, flaked Parmesan, green
That's
apple, and then like dressing is just a little olive oil, lemon juice. Like I can smash a bunch of that stuff. So like, tell me how much arugula I need to smash to meet the dietary
I'll have to take a
nitrate.
About as much
calculation.
CBD as you need to rub on your knee to make it feel better. But okay, creatine. My question for you is, since time immemorial, it's been 5 grams a day, and now we're seeing 20 grams a day. What's the deal with this?
Yeah, so I think a couple of the researchers, Darren Kandow, Abby Smith-Ryan, that are doing this work definitely say that there is utility in higher doses, so 10, 20 grams. The 20-gram stuff is really the most recent data on 20 grams. It was done from a study on sleep deprivation, right? So that was like roughly about 20 grams they were giving people. I can't remember exactly how many grams per kilo they were giving people, but it roughly came out to about 20 grams. So I think the question that we need to be asking, and this is also really important for your question, your original question, Alex, is what works for what, right? So 20 grams every day.
Yeah. Post-concussive recovery is one thing. Telling everybody to do that, something totally different.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so this is, again, something with supplements that we always need to be very careful about is for the majority of them, the vast majority, there's a U-shaped curve, right? So not enough is bad, but too much can also be bad. And I think in the society that we live in, we tend to think of supplements as if a little is good, a lot is better. And that really doesn't pan out in the data and oftentimes can be quite harmful. Kids in the hospital trying to avoid measles with vitamin A, overdoses. That's real, right?
Multiple hospitalizations for vitamin A overdoses.
Problematic.
Yeah.
So we need to be really careful about supplements. But I will say there's utility there. As far as creatine goes, I would say the effective dose for muscle building, which is typically what people are taking it for, is going to be somewhere in that 5 to 10 gram range.
But see, people are going to hear that and be like, yeah, but like 20, they said it was good. Don't do it.
What we don't have right now, which I think is important, is we don't have the upper limit on the U-shaped curve, right? So we don't know if there is a too much issue. I would say you're probably coming on a too much issue personally if your like gut is a mess, right? But creatine can do a number on your gut. If you're cramping a lot, that is an indicator that you're probably taking too much.
But if your traps are huge, then it's all good.
It's all good. Yeah.
Ignore me.
All right. Keeping this moving slightly fast.
So supplements have utility. I would say go to the gym. Right?
Yes.
Like that's the big lever, right? That's the big bar on your graph. When we're looking at all these complementary therapies, these protocols, if you will, that people are starting to come out with now, whether it's cold plunge or cryo or red light or sauna or whatever, yeah, they're great. And they probably are helpful. But again, just remember that bar is going to be fairly small unless you're using it for something that has like a very specific purpose, as we were talking about, and data is emerging on something like long COVID or something like migraines or something like a diagnosis that you're trying to treat with. And then I would say buyer beware, because that data doesn't exist. It's why I have a job.
Okay, this just popped into my head because we've talked about lifestyle medicine. We're talking about supplements. I know that there are people out there, and I'm thinking of the military population specifically, who are curious in pursuing, I don't know what you want to call this, like alternative therapies, alternative medication, whatever. Like maybe they're facing something and they're curious if creatine or any of the big 5 you just mentioned might help. Like what type of specialist should somebody go to get that type of advice so that they're not going to the internet and taking 20 grams of creatine?
Yeah. I mean, the best person to go, if you're talking about nutrition stuff, the best person to go to is a dietitian, and sports dietitian would be like a human performance dietitian. They're brilliant. They're really well trained. They've got years and years and years of training in this particular space. That would be the person that I would send folks to for sure.
Okay.
All right.
Go.
Slight pivot here.
Now rapid fire. Sorry.
Yeah, we're going to go a little bit faster. In your opinion, and this, again, could be a rabbit hole, we're going to keep it fast. Has the term evidence-based gone too far?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I think there's a whole episode of unpacking we could do there, but I just wanted to like put a researcher on the spot for a second.
Yeah, be really clear of it. So evidence-based means a lot of different things to different people. And I would argue from my space, evidence-based means there's data. There is data in the lab. We understand mechanism. There is application in the clinic or in the real world. And then there is essentially like the way that real people are feeling in the space that they are living or, you know, recovering in or whatever. So evidence-based as a researcher that's like protective of this space is often just couched in the like, if the science doesn't say it, it's not evidence-based. And it's like, well, there's a little bit more gray zone here than we think about, but also it is being co-opted by a lot of really, really, really clever marketing teams that say, if there's a study on, you know, I don't know, glutathione supplementation in mice, we're going to call that evidence-based, right? Like that's not.
Yeah, evidence-based just means the Instagram post has a PMID in the caption.
Yeah. Not that.
That's
not that.
what
not
it means
that.
right now.
Yeah, not that. Also, here's a clue. And Drew, you got totally called out on this one by Alex a second ago in the other episode. Is that here you know that people actually don't really know what they're talking about if they're citing their sources as the National Library of Medicine or the NIH. Like those are not research organizations. They are amplifiers. They are catalogs.
It's a database. It's where the stuff gets posted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like citing Google.
Yeah. So I've had a couple of experiences that with marketing teams that I've been working with, and I'm like, that is not how we do this. And I came across one on a very, very, very popular website the other day, and I was like,
are you allowed to give us a hint?
I'll just say it was because it won't give exactly which one it is. It's one of these newsletters that we all subscribe to that like gives us the state of the wellness industry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fitter.
No.
Okay. That's fair.
It's in that zone though.
Okay.
Okay.
Another quick one, and then I think Drew will probably go with some more traditional closers.
Well, she hit our traditional closers last time. We got to come up with some new ones.
Well, if you look at the Word document in front of you, I've highlighted one you can use.
Okay. Thank you.
So you, if I'm not mistaken, have a master's degree, a Master of Education degree in physical education.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still involved in anything you would call physical education? And can we take a couple minutes and just dive into the rabbit hole of like what physical education in America could and should be?
Yeah. I haven't worked. So I think traditionally when people think physical education, so my degree was from BU, it's in physical education and coaching. And it was really focused on probably the time period that you're hinting at, which is kind of like elementary to high school physical education typically delivered in the school system, right? And so I went down a 2-year rabbit hole of pedagogy. How do we teach physical education? How do we get buy-in for it? I did a couple of research projects with Reebok on a couple of interventions at the time, and I have drifted away from that population. But I will say it is dire. The way that we teach movement to our kids is abysmal, and it has ramifications across the lifespan. When I was working in the more like military centric space, you all know this data is like how unqualified the young people are to actually serve based upon their physical fitness. And that's carrying over to the diseases of our time. And the biggest problem is what we recognize is if you don't teach kids to move early on, they don't move later in life. Mm-hmm. So teaching an old dog new tricks in this space is really, really hard. What I did do when I was early in my career is I was a strength coach and I was a teacher in a middle school and a high school. This is 20 years ago now. And what we did, which was really different, and I'll toot my own horn a little bit based upon myself as well as a couple of the other educators in that space. And I was teaching science and I wasn't teaching physical education. I was the strength and conditioning coach on campus. We had like cool PE classes. It wasn't like your traditional, like we're going to do dodgeball and, like get all those little wheelie carts out and, make people change and the whole thing. Like we had spin classes and we did yoga and we had options for kids that weren't identifying with the traditional PE. And I keep in touch with a lot of those kids, and it was very impactful for them to basically be met where they were and not be forced to do something that they didn't want to do.
Have you seen the documentary of the, what is it, La Sierra High School?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, I will send you a link.
Oh, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
It is the most badass PE program that's ever existed.
Amazing.
I will also do a quick,
class.
I'll do a quick shout out to Rob Wilkins is the reason I know this. So shout out to former podcast guest Rob Wilkins. But 2003, the Washington, DC Teacher of the Year, and then finalist for National Teacher of the Year was Jermar Roundtree. He's a physical education teacher, I think preschool through 8th grade physical education teacher. I remember looking, it's been a while. Obviously, this was 2023, so it's been a while since I actually dug into it. I think it had been at least 50 years since a physical education teacher came anywhere near finalist status in National Teacher of the Year. It's just
I remember reading that. Yeah.
Like that level of just like not even considering it as a possibility for somebody worthy of recognition says a lot about the state of physical education.
They're all
when I was doing my program at BU, there were a bunch of PE teachers that were getting their masters alongside with me. And every single one of them to a person was teaching at 4 or 5 different schools. They were just like shuttling around. They were not full-time employees at any of the schools. They were not in the same districts. They were literally like, they would show up on Monday at this school and show up on Tuesday at this school. It's, it's a very, unfortunately, it's a very disrespected profession, I think, which is starting to bite us in the ass. We can go down the Maha route about how, again, they're asking the right questions and answering them poorly. But this is, I think, a really good example of like, if we can shine a light on this and actually bring some resources and intentionality to it, I think it could be huge.
We were wondering whether this was going to be a 2-part or 3-part podcast series, and the conversation might bring up a part 3.
I just want to commend you for that beautiful transition into your own closer.
Okay.
Because the question I want to ask you before we send you away is, what are topics you wish people asked you that don't get enough attention?
That is a great question. I think we kind of covered it. I just feel like, especially in the world that I live in now, everybody wants to talk about the shiny objects, right? They want to talk about the cryos. They want to talk about the intravenous NAD, which we didn't talk about either, which would be really fun.
Sorry.
I'm bullish on that, by the way, for people that are
I can tell.
Intravenous NAD.
Not intravenous NAD. I mean, people are doing intravenous NAD. They shouldn't. It's dumb. You should do intravenous NR if you're doing that.
Sounds like you're shooting a lot of stuff into people's veins, based on the trajectory of this conversation.
It's very interesting. Very interesting.
But you can't put people in a cold tub?
Apparently not. My IRB didn't let me do it.
Interesting.
I can do it now. I have an IRB that is supportive.
Okay.
Yeah, you work for a company that does a lot of that.
Yeah, we do a lot of it.
Have you cold plunged somebody while you're injecting them with stuff?
No, but that actually is, it would be really hard to do that because it basically would like close down their veins. So it would really slow the drip because they would vasoconstrict.
This is my favorite part about having you on. I'm literally just coming up with crazy shit to throw at you. And every time you're like, no, but like, actually, here's this thing we did that's very similar. And here's what. I haven't yet found your limit. Thank you for being that way.
Have you guys ever heard of the book Range?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Of
course. Epstein?
That's me. Yeah.
Different Epstein. David Epstein. Sorry. Yeah.
Different Epstein.
Yeah, there are other Epsteins. Anyway, the question I asked you.
Yes, people always want to talk about the shiny stuff, right? Which is fun and it's super cool. And I love talking about this, as you can see. But I think what people, and we highlighted this already, so there's no need to go back in this conversation except just like put an exclamation point on it, is the foundational fundamentals are going to move the needle more than anything else, right? And so that's the stuff that I feel like it just doesn't get enough airtime. Like if we can say over and over again, 150 minutes team, 150 minutes. I don't care if you do zone 2. I don't care if you are at CrossFit. I don't care if you are doing your sprint interval training, like get on that Airdyne. I do not care, but like get the minutes in. That's the lever, right? Like we are losing ourselves in the minutia, in the weeds, if you will. And we're driving ourselves crazy when we could literally just be like, you know what? A 45-minute walk in the hills is great today. And like, that's what I'm doing. And I feel really wonderful. And that's going to have exponential benefit on my health. If you want to do a cold plunge after, awesome. But that's not moving the needle as much as whatever you did in the 45 to 60 minutes of actual movement. It's just not the same.
Well, I just want to say thank you. We're over an hour now. We appreciate this. If this ends up being a 2-part podcast series, that's it. If it ends up with a 3rd part, it's because we decided to get back into the MAHA stuff and the state of the research community right now.
And intravenous NAD. Speaking of moving needles, there's more needles to discuss.
But I think regardless of whether there's a 3rd episode here, I think there will be future collaboration. And you already heard the invite to the Discord. So anybody who's a member there will hopefully be hearing from her on there soon as well.
Awesome. Super excited for that. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Team, welcome to the post show, the after show. We really need a name for this segment. The Treehouse.
You keep calling it like after party lately.
After party. Okay, that works. Team, welcome to the after party. Second time we've had Rachel come on the podcast. And as with the first conversation, kind of intentionally wide ranging. I will give us kudos though. We stuck a little bit better to our script. We talked about
there was kind of a plan that time.
A little bit more of a plan. I think, just like the first episode, I think the most interesting takeaway for me is just like how shitty we are at communicating science. I like to think, I don't know, maybe I'm like in the minority here as a coach who would be interested in incorporating more science in the training, but I don't know. I'm hard pressed to visualize what that would actually look like, because all I know of science now is research journals and, methods, abstract discussion.
I mean, she gave the game away at the end. Like, yes, all the research is totally interesting, but like we're a pretty far ways away from getting people to even meet like physical activity guidelines and like my plate guidance for nutrition.
Yeah.
And so like, if we can't meet those like foundational,
why do you think that is?
Things.
That's a huge question. But I'm just, as she's talking, I'm like, because I think too of like Michael Pollan came to mind about eat food, mostly plants, some meat, I think is like his little catchphrase. And then with the physical activity guidelines, get 150 minutes. That's it.
I think it's because we miss a core component of learning. I'm gonna crack out some Bloom's taxonomy stuff for a second. We're gonna get real nerdy. Some of you may be familiar with Bloom in terms of the hierarchy of learning, like just memorization all the way up through being able to like be creative and apply it in complex situations. But I'm not talking about that hierarchy. Now I'm talking about the domains of learning, cognitive domain of learning, facts, patterns, the kind of stuff you learn in a classroom, all that. Totally cool. We do lots of that in the health and wellness space. Then there's the psychomotor domain of learning, developing movement patterns and skills, how you manipulate tools, all of those things. So for some military people, that means like marksmanship type of stuff, hand-to-hand combat type of stuff. In the fitness world, it just means a lot of like learning how to squat and deadlift and having good running mechanics and whatever it is. And those are both cool, but neither of them mean anything without the third domain, which is the affective domain, which is either learning to care about something or learning to make something part of your identity. And this is a rabbit hole I really want to go down in terms of like my own learning. And I think it's something that deserves more research than it gets. But what kinds of things about how we talk to people, how we teach people, how we interact, drive getting them to care about the thing? Because I think that's where we struggle.
Well, that's kind of my question. Like, why do you think in this health and fitness space, we gravitate towards these weird fixes, but we can't get people to just do the basics?
Because the weird fixes get people to care on their own. Like they're inherently interesting and attract attention. There's the desire for the quick fix, that secret that they just haven't heard yet. And the boring foundational stuff that you just have to do consistently is not sexy on its own. We have to give it the sexy factor to get people to care.
That's what it is. Sex sells. It's the sexiness.
Nothing sexy about my plate. Nothing sexy about 150 minutes a week and 2 resistance training sessions.
I'd almost be curious, because you're right. My plate, I mean, it is just sort of your standard government, boring, whatever. It'd be interesting to see, like, copy paste that onto different platforms. Like if we had lists, stock lists, show the same thing and maybe change the colors, it'd probably get
make public health sexy again.
Hey, maybe that's MPA.
Wait, you missed the S.
Make public health. MPA.
Yeah. Mufasa.
Mufasa. Make public health sexy again. We're gonna workshop that team. But you may have heard in the recording, I think we were still recording when we were talking about this, but we really are going to have a real push to try and help and work alongside Rachel to bridge some of this scientific communicator gap that we've talked about. So obviously, kind of our neck of the woods is the tactical human performance space, but I do want to kind of give a PSA or a shout out to coaches, which is to say that if there's things you guys are interested in having researched or working alongside a lab to uncover information about, I think we're getting closer to being able to provide that, not necessarily as a service, but just as a cool thing that we could see if we could do something with. So maybe this is a shameless plug for the Discord, because that would be a cool platform to have folks share that information. But truthfully, if people listening to this just are curious to have something investigated, let us know and we'll see what we can do with it. Yeah, that'll close out my thoughts. I don't know if you have anything else.
I'm good. More to follow.
More to follow. Team, we'll see you next week.
Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsmos.com. That's MOPS, the letter N, MOEs.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsandmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.